Hello, Lisbon. Yes. Sorry.
You brought your phone.
Dreams of being a rock star. I'm actually British, not Canadian, though I might switch nationality soon, what with everything going on. Yes, before we get to our panel discussion, this isn't because I got a huge ego, so I insist only my face is there. Before we go to the panel discussion with our experts, I'm just going to take you through a few tips, do's and don'ts on pitching, so that you can be in the position where you've got 99 problems, but the pitch ain't one. So, some do's or don'ts. First off, you want to start well. Start really strongly, start confidently. Maybe say something like, hello, Lisbon, and see how that goes. Don't be, don't be intimidated or nervous. If you do find yourself being intimidated, sorry, if you do find yourself, don't click too soon. Just add that one in. If you do find yourself being nervous, don't overcompensate and speak in a really laughing voice and say something like, I'm really touched to be here, and I can't wait to touch all of you as well. Don't overcompensate. So the thing to do if you're nervous, well, I would suggest, is try and break the tension. Maybe do something like, do an introduction. Everyone in the room does an introduction, and you say one interesting thing about yourself. So my name is David Schneider. I'm the founder of social agency That Lot, and I think most people follow me on Twitter because they think I'm actually David Schwimmer from Friends. So that's me. Okay, madam, if you want to go next. Yes? We'll come to you, it'll be about Sunday evening by the time we come to you. Okay, maybe that's not going to work here. So you might have to find another way to break the tension. The important thing is, though, you've got to be confident. Be confident. Remember, you're not just selling your product or your company, you're selling yourself. But then you don't want to be overconfident. Don't oversell yourself. That's also very important. The focus has got to be on the product and the company that you're trying to sell. So that's important. If you, at core, you must be focused and to the point. You don't want to wander off topic. Repeating yourself over and over again is really bad. So be focused and to the point. That's really important. For instance, a good technique is to state clearly what the problem is and then what you offer as a solution. So for instance, my problem was, I want to spend 4 days, all expenses paid in Lisbon. My solution, agree to give a talk at Web Summit. Very simple, set out very clearly, everyone knows what's going on. Another thing that people often ask about is pitch theater. Now, pitch theater, so doing a bit of performance, something else, something bigger around your pitch, that can be good, but
I like big butts and I cannot lie. You other brothers can't deny. And when a girl walks in with an itty bitty waist and a round thing in your face, you get.
Don't misjudge the audience, and get them to do something that they might not want to do or feel comfortable to do. Okay, so that's important. Get the limits to pitch theater always. And at the core of everything is to practice, practice, practice over and over again, so you don't. You don't forget what you were going to say. That's important. Oh, and remember not to have too many bullet points. That's another thing. So that brings me on to the slides for your presentation. So one thing is make sure with your slides that you aren't presenting the same thing as you did for the competitor without changing it. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, there we go. So that's important. Another really important thing is always check for typos and mistakes, because they can make you look really bored. So that's important. Make sure that your images don't look like they've been done by an 8-year-old, especially not an 8-year-old in 2001. And stock images. Yes, make it pretty. Use stock images. Of course, that's really good. But try and be original with them. Try not to use the sunset and the people doing the thumbs up. But then again, don't be too original with them, because if you go too far, I don't think that works personally. I don't know about you. Make sure that your images are high quality enough. They might look good on your laptop, but if they are on a big screen like this, maybe it doesn't work. And always check, this is a really important one, always check whether something that makes sense to you, a graph, a chart that makes sense to you, might look a bit rude if you've not seen it before, like this one. Really important, this. And especially if the title of the graph is something like customer penetration in Europe. Really important. Take a note of that. But the really most significant things are these following slides. So don't overload your presentation with lots of words that really you don't need. Don't do that. Don't have charts with hundreds and hundreds of entries. There you can see the number of people who give a shit about your table, with the entries in the table and the number of people in the pitch very quickly goes to 0, so don't do that. You want to avoid mess and clutter and just cut it down to the essential thing, which is how much money can they make from you. There you see it's 15,000 shed loads of money. A shed is a big amount of money. So that's pretty much all. To sum up, there are 2 golden rules of pitching. Before we go, I just share this before we go on to our panel discussion. 2 golden rules. Rule number 1 is always leave them wanting more. And thank you very much, obrigado. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So that's what my understanding of pitching is, sort of, but I don't see as many pitches as you do. So Christine, anything that I missed that you feel
Yeah, well, you had a lot of builds.
Had a lot of
Slide builds, where there's like one and a bit, and it's all still the same slide. So my first note to you would be to fewer builds, because if the investor wants to go back, you're like, oh, wait, I got to go back through this. And you're peeling them off one at a time to get to the slide before. It's not good.
Okay, so that's a really good point. I didn't realize I was going to be critiqued. But
it seemed appropriate.
If we can just please make it general. But that, he says.
So if I were to give some general first advice, it would be to know sort of what the context is that you're going into. It's very different to you're at a demo day and you're part of a class and you have 3 minutes on stage. What you would do in that environment. You're basically doing slides to get a meeting, and you're not trying to actually convey everything about your business. You're just trying to get meetings and give them just enough to say, oh yes, a meeting would make sense. And then once you actually get the meeting, the next set of advice is, okay, again, you're not trying to tell them everything about your business. You're trying to get to the second meeting. So what's appropriate in the first meeting? And you don't have 60 minutes if you've booked an hour. You have 10 minutes for the investor to go to the bathroom and check their email after their last meeting. You have 5 minutes for them to come in and then for the slides to not work and you're doing technical support. Then you've got remember, you save 5 to 10 at the end of the meeting so you can make sure you get some follow-ups. So you really have maybe 35 minutes, assuming you only spent 5 or 10 ice breaking once you actually got started. So make sure you're always designing for out of a 60-minute meeting, maybe 35 minutes of content and conversation.
Great. Jager,
the only thing I would add is, I see a lot of people trying to just make one pitch deck. They'll do one pitch deck they want to mail, and they'll do the same pitch deck when they're going and presenting it. That's usually a bad idea. You can put a little bit more content in the one that you're mailing, because you're, again, trying to get that first meeting. But if you have that meeting, you don't want them reading all of that on the slide when you're presenting. So kind of cut it down, have 2 different decks. It takes a little bit more effort, but you're trying to raise millions of dollars. It's worth a little bit of extra effort.
Yeah.
And what would you say are the most obvious mistakes that people make while pitching? Yeah,
I mean, there's sort of 2 biggies, and they're sort of related. Do they know their customer? I think is a big miss that a lot of people just don't think a lot about. They say to themselves, well, it's for everyone, or it's for the whole country, and they can't specify actually who is their target user, who is actually going to buy the thing that they want. And if you can do a good job of that, it gives confidence from the investor standpoint, trying to understand, okay, these people know their business and they see the opportunity. But just listening to some of the pitches actually on the pitch stage, it was kind of all over the board about who specifically is going to be using this, who's going to be in love with this product, and why is it important to them, and how do you know? Are you just guessing, or did you actually go and do research and talk to those folks? It can't just be you think it's a good idea. So that's sort of one piece. The other, and related to that, is how big is the market? What is the total addressable market, the TAM? And I see a lot of these pitches kind of go off the rails where since they've said, well, I'm going to sell it to everyone, well, and we charge $1,000 a person, it's a $30 trillion opportunity. And like, it isn't viable. So you lose all credibility because you had such a big vision and you weren't able to kind of pare it down to realism a bit.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that vexes me most is when the person pitching doesn't say what they do right up front. You know, they're going to walk me through this story, and I'm supposed to wait for this big reveal that comes in, like on slide 3 or slide 7, and I'm sitting there. They don't realize that by the time they actually tell me what they're doing, I'm desperately trying to figure out what they're doing throughout the story. And I've probably come up with like 10 different ideas for what the company does. So when they finally tell me what it is they're doing, I'm like, okay, yeah, it was this one over here. And now I'm comparing it to all the other things they could have been doing. It's just really not a good focused way to start the meeting. So yes, storytelling is important, but it's okay to say, we do this, and then tell the story about what that is and how you got there. Just because it's very frustrating as the investor to be guessing for the first however many minutes.
Yeah. That's interesting, your point about that there's the deck that you mail and the deck that you present. Can you tell us a bit more, I mean, Jager, we start with you, can you tell us a bit more about the important differences? Yes, you have to write out more in the deck that you mail, but anything else?
Yeah, I mean, another problem with decks and pitches in general is that they tend not to be concise, right? So you need to make sure that you are saying what is necessary. You don't have to say everything. What are the most important metrics to the business? If you give all of the metrics of the business, or a lot of them, it sort of makes me feel like you don't really know your business well enough to tell me which ones are important. So you're sort of saying all of the data for me to decide what the most important one is. So I think that's an important one. Be really, really concise on how you're communicating, in particular your metrics around what your business, how your business is doing, because all the other stuff comes down to due diligence, right? Like the investor is going to get to those pieces of information. It's okay to sort of punt some of them to have a conversation later, because if you have them all in there, just going to be asking every single question about it, you're not going to get to the finish of the pitch. You're not going to be able to get to the thing that might be the most compelling part.
And does that imply for when you email it, or as well as?
Both.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
For sure.
Is there any other differences that you would say between the deck you email and what you do in the...
Yeah, well, they're, especially nowadays, I think a lot of folks, their short pitch is very visual. It's like lots of images. It's not necessarily bullet points with text. And those obviously make terrible email decks. Because you've emailed me a stack of pictures, and I don't know what they do. It's just a bunch of pictures. I mean, they're nice pictures. So that email deck, really... I almost prefer to not get a full deck. I prefer to just get, one blurb, maybe 2 blurbs, one that talks about what you do, and then a second one that talks about your traction and how you're doing on the thing you say you're going to do. Because that's really enough for me to, again, come back and say, yes, I want a meeting. And that's the only reason to send me any information is to see if I will meet with you. Because if I'm not, do you really want me to have all that? Probably not.
And when they're in the room, what are the bad mistakes that people make in the room without naming names, or with naming names?
I think, and some of this I'm going to slant a little bit just because we do have a lot of female founders in the house, which I'm very excited about, and I do have a diversity fund. So I think one of the mistakes you can make is assuming who's the decision maker in the room. You are presenting to everyone who came to play, and don't, decide and pick the one guy or the one woman. Like, pitch to everyone, because you don't know whose voice will make the biggest difference, once you're out and they're talking about you behind your back, right? So that's the biggest one that I think a lot of folks make.
Right.
And I think that in person, it's that lack of practice. You mentioned it. A lot of people will practice in front of a mirror or in their head or maybe with a few friends. Like, that's not how you do practice for a pitch. I used to work at Salesforce eons ago. I guess it was 4 years ago. And Mark Benioff, who is pretty big deal. He knows how to do pitches. He goes and gets a whole set of his prospects, people that aren't even customers, people that don't know his business very well at all, and pitches them all of Dreamforce, right? They sit there for 2 hours and hear his whole pitch. And that gives him insights into how to do it, what works, what doesn't work, what jokes work, which don't. And that's the level of diligence that you need to do if you want to go and have a good pitch. You need to do that sort of hard practicing, not the easy practicing, to find that success.
Yeah, and to be sure that, I think of that set of slides you bring into the room as your first click. And you need to be prepared to answer questions that are the obvious double clicks, maybe some of the triple clicks. And then after that, it's okay if you don't have everything in that deck in an appendix. And by the way, yes, push all the double clicks to the appendix. Because we usually don't expect that you will be there to talk about the last little detail of your sales cycle. But you need to have those top numbers like on the tip of your tongue, ready to go. It is not impressive when a CEO can't answer basic questions about the business.
So what excites you when there's a pitch happening? Is it the product? Is it the person? Is it a bit of both? Christine?
Yeah, I'm always looking for three things. I'm looking for team, products, and customer acquisition strategy, because I tend to do more early stage investing, so I don't have people coming in saying, oh, well, here's the $2 billion market that we've already made a bunch of progress on. This is something is brand new. Here's how we're going to get to our first 1,000 customers and maybe our first 10,000 and build a market from scratch. That's most exciting for me. And so the folks that come in knowing answers to those three key points I care about will always get my attention, because a lot of folks can talk about their team and they sound great, but they don't necessarily know how they'll get from A to B. And if you can't get to B, you're not going to get to C to D to E to F. So I want to know you can get to B with that first check that you get through the door.
And then one of the parts that I personally like a lot is the product demo. And this is where a lot of people can kind of go sideways. You either win or you lose on that product demo. Some things please never, ever do is press play on a video of your product demo in a live meeting, unless it's impossible to demo it live.
Yeah, if it's a flying car, okay.
Okay. but other than that, give a live demo. And then when you're giving the demo, this is not a training. You're not training me how to use the product. You're hopefully speaking what is the value to the user, speaking value terms throughout it, rather than saying this is the function of this click, this is the function of this click. Make it exciting, make it interesting, get us involved, get us passionate about your product. You should be passionate about your product. And if you can't bring that passion across when you're going and demonstrating it, it's a red flag. It's a bad sign.
So I'm not saying that a lot of startups are led by people who are nerdy and shy. There's no data to back that up at all. But what happens if if there's a very nervous person who's not good at presenting? A, what advice can you give them? And B, does it matter?
As long as they can answer questions, it really doesn't matter. Basically, most investors are people who are awfully awkward, but just figured out how to cope. We figure out how to hide it for the duration of a meeting, so it's not obvious to you. So we've been in those shoes. We're totally understandable of the shoes. I kind of like people who wear those shoes, actually, because the super polished guy, I'm like, you're a little too slick. I want the awkward hustler who's just gonna, bust it until they make it happen. So yeah, they shouldn't worry about it. But know the material, because you're gonna skip around. And so you can't get flustered when someone asks a question that you have all the way at the end of the deck, but they're really curious, and it's your opportunity. So don't say, we'll get to that. Say, okay, let's talk about that point, but you have to know your material well enough to go back to where you were, so you can go back to your own storyline. But just don't get thrown when that happens. It will happen.
And then the only thing I'd add to that is, we raised our Series B back in about a year and a half ago, and I'm one of those people. I am the nerdy person, and people tend to not like me. I don't need people to give me a hug right now,
people like
but
you.
people like me. So I brought someone with me who is way more personable and someone that is easier to
Can't
like.
believe there's anyone more personal than you, Jager.
But bring a wing person along with you to sort of at least play a little bit. They have a little be dynamic with them, have a conversation, let them have certain parts, and it brings a little life to your presentation that you wouldn't necessarily have. And in my case, it wasn't like a co-founder. It was just my head of revenue, and he knew a lot of the business, I knew a lot of the business, and it played well. So think about that as a way to offset your awkwardness.
Yeah, and people like to see a good team too. So I'd much rather see someone come in with, whether it's a co-founder or an early employee, it doesn't matter, but they come in and I see that basically you play well together, you're coordinated, that you're good, you've got good teamwork, and so I'd much rather see that than just a single founder doing the representation. Yeah.
So we're coming towards the end. So are there like a couple of real takeaways that you could give people to help them with their pitches, Christine?
Yeah. So this is my hack when I've had to pitch, because VCs have to raise money too. So my hack is, don't start with slides. Bring up a spreadsheet, and I'm an old-fashioned girl, do an outline. And in your outline, you have that first column, and you probably do 12 points, or however many it is, and say, what are the points I need to make throughout this conversation? And just make a list of those points in the order that makes sense to you. And then say, okay, what data do I have? Because I'm not going to vomit all of my data into this slide deck. What data makes that point the best? And that's the only thing you put in there. And so, again, stupid human tricks, but just doing those 2 columns on a spreadsheet will save you so much pain and suffering in slide development, and it just makes a lot more sense. And so I say that.
Right.
That's good. Mine would be that there are something like 40,000 investors in the world. There's a lot of them, and we love every single one of them. But I've seen a lot of folks go and send their pitch deck to 40,000 investors. They just go on this pray and spray kind of approach, and that's not very effective. So if you figure out what is the actual investor that you want. What are you looking for in an investor? Are you looking to find a diverse set of investors? Are you looking for an investor who has invested in stuff like yours before, has a background like yours, whatever it happens to be? Make that a big priority when you filter down the list of the people that you're reaching out to, and then use that reason as the reason that you're reaching out to them. So you show a personal connection that you did research and that there's a good reason for you to be talking in the first place. That's because ultimately you want them to be a champion of your concept, your idea, and you at the end of the day. And making that personal connection even before you kind of get into the nitty-gritty helps. And I don't see many people doing that. I get 30 emails a day of people just sending me decks that are completely irrelevant to me, and that I just dismiss them. That's not even worth a response because they didn't do any due diligence to see if I was a good fit. They just got a mailing list somewhere.
And I love when I get those emails that say, "Dear Mr. Herron." I'm like, you did really little homework. There's no mistaking this.
Right. Okay, well, sadly, we've run out of time. I'd like to say thank you to Christine and Jager, and good luck to anyone who's pitching and got new stuff out there. Thank you very much for listening. Cheers.
Awesome. Thanks.